Today is the day the Nintendo Switch OLED model has officially launched, and I wanted to help some people out with getting their system started. So we're going to go over a couple useful things to know, including best ways to bring over stuff from a previous system if you're upgrading to an OLED, or if this is your first Nintendo Switch system, some good tips and tricks to keep in mind. If you guys have missed it, I've done a bunch of other Switch OLED content, including comparing it to the other systems, answering very specific questions. They're all a part of a playlist that this video is a part of as well, so make sure to check that out. And if you've been enjoying this content, make sure to subscribe. First off, let's talk about upgrading. Now, if you have your older version of the Switch available, whether that's an original Switch or a Switch Lite, the best option you have is to do direct system transfer. Note that there is no way to actually move an entire system data from one system to another. Instead, you are going to be transferring individual users along with their save data. If there are multiple users on a Switch that you all want to bring over, you're going to have to transfer each one at a time. This requires having both systems on hand, but this is the easiest method that's going to bring over the most data possible. It's going to make sure that the new OLED model becomes your primary Switch. It's going to bring over your save data. It'll bring over your Nintendo account. There are, however, a couple things that are still going to be missing. Animal Crossing requires its own very special form of moving save data, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And it's not going to actually move over a lot of your game data. You'll need to manually reinstall games by either downloading them or popping your physical cart in. This also won't move screenshots. For that, you're going to have to rely on loading them onto a micro SD card and dumping them somewhere else. Also worth noting, you can't just grab the SD card from one Switch and put it in the new one. Doesn't work that way. SD cards are tied to the Switch that they are initially set up on, so you do have to set up a brand new one, or take the one on your old Switch, wipe it, and give it a fresh start on the new one. Now, if you don't have your original Switch on hand, either because you sold it or traded it in advance, maybe you're planning on getting an OLED and you want to get rid of your other Switch first, there's a couple things that are going to be a little tougher you need to keep in mind. First off, if you haven't gotten rid of the Switch yet, but you are planning to before you get your hands on the OLED models, you're not going to have them at the same time, make sure to have an active Nintendo Switch Online account, because that's going to give you the ability to use cloud saves so you can back up any game data you have to make sure that you can continue your progress on another system. There are some games that sadly do not make use of the cloud save features, stuff like Pokemon Let's Go and Splatoon, so that kind of stuff, if you don't have both Switches at the same time, you're actually going to end up losing out on that. Something else that's very important to do in this situation also is to make sure you activate your new OLED Switch as your primary Switch. And if you don't know what this means, anytime you have a number of Nintendo Switch consoles, even if it's just one, you have one system that's designated as your primary, and all the others that you have your account on will be secondary. The primary Switch is the one that's going to allow you to play games offline that you've purchased digitally. It also allows you to share games that you own digitally with other users that are using that Switch as well. So it's very important that the Switch you're actively using the most is the one that's your primary. Now again, if you do a direct transfer, this is just going to come over right away. But if you don't have your old Switch on hand, you actually have to deactivate your previous Switch as the primary. The way you can do that if you don't have it on hand is by going online to Nintendo's website, and under your account settings, go to Shop menu, scroll to the bottom, and you'll see an option to deregister your old Switch as the primary. Once you've done that on your new Switch OLED, just log into the eShop and bam, your new Switch will now be considered the primary one. Now, one game that acts as a very important exception to basically everything we've talked about so far is Animal Crossing. Because of the way that Animal Crossing handles having an island saved to a specific system that multiple users can share, you can't bring it over like you do with most other games. Instead, you have to rely on a separate utility that is available for free on the eShop. This does require you to have access to both the old Switch that has the island on it and the new Switch you want to bring it over to. You just need to have your Nintendo account logged into both systems and follow the prompts on both of them, and it'll walk you through transferring that data. If you're planning on getting rid of your current Switch before you grab your new Switch, you can also preserve your island by using the Save Backup feature that is exclusive to Nintendo Switch Online members. You can access this and learn more by pressing the minus button on the Animal Crossing startup screen. Okay, so if you upgraded and you now have all your stuff on your new Switch, or if this is your first Switch ever, there's a couple different things that, as someone who's used to Switch for a long time, I think is handy to know, along with a couple new features that are unique to the OLED model. First off, as far as some unique new things, the Switch OLED does come with an auto brightness feature. This is not a new feature to the Switch OLED, but it does have a new importance thanks to one of the major fears with the display being burn-in. This is why when you have auto brightness on, you'll notice that the max brightness really doesn't hit the same heights that it can otherwise. So if you really need that max clarity, go for it, but I recommend keeping auto brightness on if you can, especially if OLED burn-in is a thing you've heard about and you're just a little worried about. Something else worth keeping in mind with that same logic, if you go into the system settings for your Switch, there is an option for auto sleep. Now the default for this is 10 minutes, but you can lower it to 5 minutes, 3 minutes, even as low as 1. So if burn-in is a thing that you're worried about, you can make sure to change this setting so that your Switch is just going to go to sleep whenever you leave it inactive for a moment. One note about this, inactivity is considered anytime you're not pressing buttons. So if you're playing a game that's maybe a little cutscene heavy and you're watching a lot of stuff happen back to back without any inputs on your part, maybe don't have the sleep settings being super aggressive, or else your Switch is just going to keep falling asleep on you while you're trying to watch something happen. Another setting that is new and unique to the OLED is the vivid colors option. This is under system settings and is buried a little bit deeper. You have to kind of scroll through a few things, but it's an option that actually says on-screen colors, and the default setting is vivid. This is a new thing to the OLED that is basically pushing all the colors and saturation in a lot of games even harder to really make them pop on that new OLED display. And generally, I think it is a benefit. There are a lot of games that just look way more colorful and in general are very beautiful as a result. But it has also been my experience that there are a handful of games that are already very bright and colorful on their own, and vivid color mode just kind of pushes it a little bit too much. It can look a little oversaturated and just kind of almost give you a sickly feeling. If that's ever the case where you start up a game and you're like, wow, this is way too much all at once, just go down the settings menu, go to that option, and you can change it to original so it looks closer to how it would be on a regular Switch, still benefiting from that OLED display, but just not pushing things any extra hard. Other useful things worth noting, the new Nintendo Switch dock does come with an Ethernet port. You can still connect via Wi-Fi if you prefer, but Ethernet is generally going to give you a much better experience, both in terms of how fast you can download games and how well multiplayer online matches go. So if your modem or router is close enough to where your Switch dock is, I heavily recommend hardwiring that if you can, instead of relying on that Wi-Fi, which might just be a little spottier in comparison. One other feature that's really handy that I like to let people know about is control stick calibration. Chances are you've probably heard that one of the big problems with the Switch is Joy-Con drift. Some Joy-Cons over time, after a lot of use, will begin to read inputs that aren't really there, which is not a great thing to have happen, obviously. However, not every time you experience weird inputs like that is actually the result of physical damage on the Joy-Con. Sometimes it can just be a minor software error, and a way you can check and fix that is by going into the control settings of your Switch, going to control stick calibration, and messing with the stick that's experiencing drift. It gives you the option to recalibrate it. You'll just do a couple inputs, hitting in different directions, spinning it around, and afterwards that might fix the issue if it's actually something happening on a software level and not actually a physical problem with the Joy-Con. Now, if you need to re-download any digital games you owned on your new Switch, there's actually two different ways you can do this with the eShop. One method is to just look them up individually and then select re-download, which works, but is honestly not really that efficient. You can actually go to your account settings on the eShop menu, and under there is an option called re-download, which will list every single thing you own digitally on the Nintendo Switch eShop, so you can just highlight and mark every single one you want to do and re-download them to the system. One other thing I want to shout out real quick is that a new feature that has come to the regular Switch as well as the Switch OLED is Bluetooth audio is finally a thing you can use. So if instead of buying a new gaming headset, you just want to make use of a pair of Bluetooth headphones you already own, you can set that up in the system settings menu as well. However, I will note that Bluetooth audio generally doesn't sound quite as crisp and clear as something with a dedicated wireless setup or is even wired. So just keep that in mind. It's convenient, but if you want the best experience, other options can be better. And there you go, a bunch of stuff to help you get set up on your brand new Switch OLED, along with a couple other just useful tips and tricks to keep in mind. If you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure to like it as well as subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you guys later.